like Gar said, the staff officer for evangelism on the presiding bishop's staff. But what that means, the way the Episcopal economy works, you give to your parish and they give to the diocese, and the diocese gives to the wider church. And so I really work for you. And so I'm really glad to be able to be here and meet so many of you and just talk about welcoming and belonging in the digital sphere, especially in the midst of this time, this pandemic, when we find so much of our life shifting. So I'm just super excited to be here with y'all.
Great. I'm so glad to have her here. So if you ever want to know, these are your apportionment dollars at work. In a sense, while she's doing this for us, and we don't have to pay registration, a little bit of our apportionment goes to the national church, and that provides for Jerusalem. And so she's here tonight on behalf of that. So it's really great to have these resources, and I'm really glad that she's willing to do this for us. And this is one of the cool things about Zoom, is because it's kind of a low threshold for us to get together, and we can be at the comfort of our homes and do some great work together. So, and then I want to give Bishop Kathleen, Bishop Bascom, a chance to say hi and maybe offer a quick prayer. You want to unmute?
It is fabulous to see all of you. So I'm very thankful for Gar and his reaching out to Jerusalem, and that we can be united this way. When I think of welcome, one of the first characters that comes to my mind is Zacchaeus. And I think that I am a bit of a Zacchaeus. I was kind of not very churched. One of these prayers we have is all sorts and conditions of human. I think I was one of those, all sorts and conditions, and felt welcomed into the love of God. And I think that's what we're about tonight. So I have to read just a little bit about Zacchaeus and then offer a prayer. So Zacchaeus stood barely 5 foot tall with his shoes off and was the least popular man in Jericho. He was head tax collector for Rome and had made such a killing out of it that he was the richest man in the town as well as the shortest. When word got around that Jesus would soon be passing through, he shinnied up into a sycamore tree so he could see something more than just the backs of other people's heads. And that's where he was when Jesus spotted him. Zacchaeus, Jesus said, get down out of there in a hurry. I'm spending tonight with you. Whereupon all Jericho snickered up their sleeves to think he didn't have better sense than to invite himself to the house of a man that nobody else would touch with a 10-foot pole. But Jesus knew what he was doing. Zacchaeus was taken so completely aback by the honor of the thing that before he had a chance to change his mind, he promised not only to turn over 50% of his holdings to the poor, but to pay back 4-to-1 all the cash he'd extorted from everybody else. Jesus was absolutely delighted. Today, salvation has come to this house, he said. And since that was what he was specially after, he was full of light. The Lord be with you.
And also with you.
Let us pray. Oh God, you made us in your own image and redeemed us through Jesus, your Son. Look with compassion on the whole human family. Take away the arrogance and hatred which infect our hearts. Break down the walls that separate us. Unite us in bonds of love. And work through our struggle and confusion to accomplish your purposes on earth, that in your good time, all may serve you in harmony through Jesus Christ, our Lord. And bless this gathering. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much, Bishop Bascom, for being here tonight, being with us, and having a lot of the team with us. So I'm going to hand this over to Jerusalem, and I'm going to do just a couple of quick housekeeping things. So you guys got my email and kind of explain some of what we're going to do. And if you needed to watch those intro videos, that's just a good thing to have. If you're doing stuff in your church, it's always good to have those kinds of things for people to kind of figure out what they're doing. Jerusalem's going to present for a while. We're going to have a time in breakout rooms. So you'll get automatically assigned to the breakout rooms. You'll go into the breakout rooms, and then they're going to bring you back to us. It'll look different on your screen, so don't be shocked if things go away. You haven't done anything wrong. You'll have some assignments and some other work to do. And Jerusalem will let me kind of know how long the groups are going to be, and then we'll come back. And we're going to try to keep you in the same groups if I do the technology correctly. If not, we'll say we're going to be in different groups each time. So, but we should stay in the same groups. And then we'll kind of go back and forth. We'll probably have some people coming in and out. I know there's some more people signed up. We've got about 53 of us right now in here. We had 70 total signed up. So I'm expecting some people to come in and out. Some people are coming one week and not the next. And so we'll kind of see. So people may be popping in and out as we go through the evening. If you get disconnected, just log back on and I'll make sure to let you back in. That sometimes happens. So, and then with that, just remember to mute yourself when you're not speaking. And if you want to be called on, if Jerusalem gives us that opportunity, I will do my best to watch and call on you. We'll call you out, or Jerusalem will call you out. Does that make sense? You can do a thumbs up. Awesome. Okay. Jerusalem, take it away.
All right. Thank you. Okay. Slideshow, play from start. All right. Well, welcome everyone again. I'm so glad to be here with y'all tonight. And we're going to talk about welcoming and belonging in the digital sphere over the next 2 weeks. Just to give you an overview of how our time together is going to be, we're going to begin with prayer, which thank you, Bishop, for getting us started that way tonight. Then we're going to begin talking about what it means to make the pivot. And we'll explore some different things, have some small group time, talk about invitation. Again, hopefully have time for a shorter small group time and do some group reflection and Q&A. To help our time together, if you have questions as I go along, or comments, or thoughts, or resources, feel free to use the chat. I'm totally comfortable with people using the chat during my presentations, and it's really helpful to put questions there as you think of them, so that when we come to Q&A time, we can pull questions from the chat, especially in a group this large. That can be really helpful. So don't be afraid to use the chat. Then next week, again, we'll begin with prayer, and then we'll talk about making the ask, the makings of being a good host, and makings of belonging. And we'll also have some small group time peppered in there. So the first thing we're going to do tonight is we're going to do a little minio Lectio Divina. We're not going to get real in depth and do a super long 3-part, but we are going to read a passage from Jeremiah. That's one of my personal favorite passages, especially during times when things don't go as planned. You know, which I think a lot of us could say 2020 has had a lot of that. So this is the Message kind of version of the Bible, or it's not a strict interpretation, but it's a really, I think, unique one to use for Lectio, especially when we're trying to kind of hear maybe new things. It says Jeremy because spell check hates me, but it's Jeremiah 29, 4-14. And the first person that I'm going to ask to read through is Kelly. And she is going to read for us. And then as you're listening to this, if there is a word or a phrase that jumps out at you as you're reading along, as you're listening, if you'll put that in the chat, that would be really great. Again, because there's so many of us, and we won't be able to call these out as we would be able to do in person, but I'd still love to have your participation. So just as Kelly reads through this, if you'll just put the word or phrase in the chat that sticks out to you. So Kelly, when you're ready, you can begin.
This is the message from God of the angel armies, Israel's God, to all the exiles I have taken from Jerusalem to Babylon. Build houses and make yourselves at home. Put in gardens and eat what grows in that country. Marry and have children. Encourage your children to marry and have children, so that you'll thrive in that country and not waste away. Make yourselves at home there and work for the country's welfare. Pray for Babylon's well-being. If things go well for Babylon, things go well for you. Yes, believe it or not, this is the message from God of the angel armies, Israel's God. Don't let all those so-called preachers and know-it-alls who are all over the place there take you with their lies. Don't pay attention to the fantasies they keep coming up with to please you. They're a bunch of liars preaching lies and claiming I sent them. I never sent them. Believe in me. God's decree. This is God's word on the subject. As soon as Babylon's 70 years are up, and not a day before, I'll show up and take care of you as I promised and bring you back home. I know what I'm doing. I have it all planned out. Plans to care for you, not abandon you. Plans to give you the future you hoped for. When you call on me, when you come and pray to me, I'll listen. When you come looking for me, you'll find me. Yes, when you get serious about finding me and want it more than anything else, I'll make sure you won't be disappointed. I'll turn things around for you. I'll bring you back from all the countries into which I drove you. I'll bring you home to the place which I sent you off into exile. You can count on it. God's decree.
Thank you. We're going to come back to this passage throughout our time together, and we're going to listen to it one more time at the end of tonight. But some of the words that have come out to everyone are bring you home, believe me, plans to give you a hope and a future. I'll bring you home to a place from which I sent you. Believe me, I'll turn things around for you. I will listen. Pray for Babylon's well-being. Get serious about finding me. So many wonderful reflections in the chat. I'd like to ask you now to just hold that word or phrase close to your heart as we move through the rest of our time together this evening, and just ask the Holy Spirit to be with you and to maybe show you tonight how that applies to welcoming and belonging in your context as we go through this evening. So with that, let's get started. First of all, why are we even talking about welcoming and belonging? Like, why even bother about this, especially in the digital sphere? Well, I think that's kind of obvious in some respects, right? This is where we find ourselves, and we are in the digital sphere. In 2019, I probably would have been in Kansas maybe to actually see you in person, but here we are on Zoom, and I'm grateful for that opportunity, but it's definitely different. We know that people are lonely. People were lonely before this, and people are lonely even more so now, perhaps, than they were before the pandemic. And people are lonely to the extent that it has been called a health crisis, or the crisis of loneliness, the epidemic of loneliness. I think it was just this last week on NPR. The Minister of Loneliness for the UK, that's an actual government position, was on talking about the epidemic of loneliness. So loneliness is a real thing. Scientists are studying it. Drug companies are actually studying it and doing a lot of research on it because they can't make a pill that will take away loneliness. And so they're learning that it's affecting things like cardiovascular health, as well as mental health issues and rates of suicide and job productivity, a lot of things. Loneliness affects a lot of things. So welcoming, helping people feel welcome and helping them feel like they belong can help address this loneliness situation, because we are created for each other. If you go all the way back to our origin story, to Genesis, you know, there's God and Adam, and they're hanging out in the Garden of Eden in the cool of the day and seem to be having a good old time chatting about all sorts of things. And still God says this isn't quite enough. Adam needs more, and Adam needs another person, right? So if you look through all of Scripture from Adam all the way until now, the experience of God's people, we continue to be put into community, from tribes to families to the early church. If you look at the life of Jesus, right? Jesus was born into community of a family. He did his ministry within a community of the disciples. He even died in the community between two thieves, and his kind of last focus was on making sure his mother and the one he loved, right, were in community. So community is essential to the human experience, and it's probably really God's plan A for how we're supposed to experience love on the earth. So if we find ourselves in a time where people are dispersed and people are lonely anyway, and now are maybe more lonely, and we're plan A for bringing God's love, then maybe we should have some plans around that. And transformation, belonging, and liberation still matter, even when we are separate and even when we are not apart. The transformation that the love of Jesus provides, and the belonging that we find in our communities with God and with each other, and the liberation that can be found by following Jesus and living into his way of love. These things don't go away just because we're in a pandemic. In fact, in some ways, they're more heightened, and people are desiring these things even more, or maybe we are just noticing more how the need is very raw in some of these ways. So that's where we find ourselves. And this is why we're talking about welcoming and belonging in the digital sphere right now. Okay, so how do we get started? Well, the first thing we have to do to make the pivot is to acknowledge where we are and where we are not. We are not in a pre-pandemic world anymore. We are in a pandemic world, and we will forever be changed by having lived through this. Even when it's over, it will continue to affect where we are and how we do ministry and how we as a culture interact with each other. It's going to affect workplaces and schools and all sorts of things. Probably for the rest of our lifetimes, right? In some way, it is going to continue to unpack. And so we have to begin by acknowledging where we are and not just focusing on where we wish we were. If you notice in the passage of Jeremiah that I talked about, and you look at the history of Israel, right? They're in Egypt, and then they're in the wilderness, and they finally get to the promised land. And then in Jeremiah, the passage, they'd been in Jerusalem, then they were in Babylon. They'll eventually get to go back. And so I just wanted to show this to say, this is where we are, right? We're in that middle section right now. We lived in pre-COVID. We're going to be somewhere different eventually, but we are in that wilderness, Babylon, exile place. And just as God spoke to his people when they were in the wilderness, when they were in exile, I believe God is speaking to us now. And I think some of the messages are actually very similar. So once we acknowledge where we are, that we're in the middle place, then I think the next thing we have to do is look at some of those next verses. We have to acknowledge the soil that we have, right? So the verses are build houses and make yourselves at home. The Israelites did not want to be where they were. They were not happy about it. They were complaining, and they were kind of putting off living their lives. They didn't want to flourish where they were. They just wanted to go back, right? They just wanted to go back. And so they had kind of there was like a hiatus. Like, we're just, like a toddler who refuses to get dressed, right? Like, we're just going to dig in our heels, and they like a toddler, go limp, and you can't even get anything on them because they're like jelly. It's kind of spiritually like what the Israelites were doing. And I think there's a real temptation for all of us sometimes to do that in this moment. Like, let's just wait. Let's just hold our breath until we're done. Until we get to whatever, this is all over and we can go back to normal. Well, normal doesn't exist the way it was, and it probably won't ever exist exactly the way it was. And that's a hard thing for some of us to deal with, and some of our people to deal with, and something we do have to spend time grieving. But at the same time, God's direction, I believe, to us is to build houses and to make ourselves at home where we are without looking at how temporary this may be. and to put in gardens and eat what grows in that country. And there's so many more of these directives that God gives the Israelites while they're in exile that just have to do with being here now, to being where you are. What will grow in this new soil is the question, I think, in front of us right now. What will grow in the new soil of how things are now instead of the soil we had? And how can we not just survive this, but how can we thrive in this? After God says build houses and grow gardens, and he says marry and have children and encourage your children to marry and have children so that you will thrive and not waste away. This passage isn't just about having more kids or having families, but it's about community. It's about thriving, and it's about growing what will grow in that soil. So this is a picture from our pumpkin patch in about October. Some of our small group friends came over. I was safely way back with a mask on, and zoomed in on them. We let our small group from our church come and pick pumpkins we have a small 8-acre farm here in Arkansas, and they come and get pumpkins every year. And this has become a tradition now. Our small group's been meeting for about 4 years, and so these kids have grown up. We're their pumpkin patch source, and so of course they still wanted to come out. And so we had big fun, them picking their pumpkins. But one of my colleagues, Anthony Guillen, who is the director for ethnic ministries for the Episcopal Church, well, he lives in Southern California, and he has all these citrus trees there, and he grows all these limes and lemons and so many yummy things. If I tried to grow limes and lemons in Arkansas, it would not work. It just wouldn't work. And there's some things that I grow that he can't grow in Southern California. And so this moment we are in and this opportunity that we have is to figure out what will grow in the soil we have, what will grow in the soil of pandemic time that maybe wouldn't have grown in 2019, and what grew in 2019 or 2018 or 1974 or 1956 or right 1993, what grew in that soil, it might not grow in 2020 or 2021 or 2022, right? Like that might be something that the soil is just not right for, and it is not going to grow here or thrive here, but some other things will. And so to not give up hope, something will be able to grow in the soil we have now. We just have to spend some time investing and figuring out what that is. To do that, to help you know what will grow, what to grow, and how to thrive, you first need to know who you are as your ministry, your parish, your diocese, your area, your community, wherever it is that you're kind of thinking about implementing some welcoming and belonging. You need to know who you are. Part of the Israelites thing is they knew who they were, and God was helping to remind them who they were, but they knew who they were. They're God's beloved. Well, we're God's beloved, right? And everyone we encounter is God's beloved. But in order to know what we can plant and what can thrive, we also have to know who we are. So we do have a farm, but we can't grow everything. Even the things that we should be able to grow here in Arkansas, just can't because of who Nathan and I are and the amount of time we have. Corn, for instance, is very hard for us to grow. Like technically we can grow it, and you can see farmers that have like acres and acres and acres of it if you drive through certain parts of the state. But on our little farm, corn doesn't really grow, even though it should. And so we have had to learn who we are. We're amazing pumpkin farmers. Who knew? But we're amazing pumpkin farmers. We had to get to know ourselves and our land and what we were capable of time-wise and what brings us great joy. Because frankly, growing pumpkins brings us great joy, and growing corn, we like to eat corn, but we can buy locally grown corn a lot easier than we can. And that's great. Let's let somebody else flourish, right? In growing corn. We'll grow the pumpkins. So, who are you? What is your ministry story, your parish's story, your diocese story, your Bible studies story, right? I love this part right here about the don't let those so-called preachers and know-it-alls who are all over the place there take you in with their lies. Don't pay any attention to the fantasies they keep coming up with to please you. They're a bunch of liars preaching lies. I have a friend who says, you just keep on lying through that lie hole of yours, right? I think one of the reasons I wanted to share this particular part of the passage at this moment is that you are uniquely created. Your ministry is unique. You have a unique voice. You have a unique place in the community. You have a uniqueness about you, and it's not going to be like anybody else's, and that's okay. And there was this horrible meme, or no, it wasn't a meme. It was an ad going around this week. If you're on Facebook, you may have seen it. And it was an advertisement for how to do online worship by some big worship company somewhere, but that it was saying, beat the mega church pastors at their own game or something was like the tagline. And, of course I understand why they said that, but we shouldn't ever be trying to beat another ministry, right? Like, we're not in competition with each other. We're all in God's work together. We're just all doing it differently. And it's those liars and the so-called know-it-alls who are like, you need this flashy thing to do ministry great, or this is what a successful parish looks like, or this is what a successful ministry looks like. No, God has called you and your ministry to be something unique and beautiful that will be rooted in your present joy and your present gifts to the soil of now and the need of now. And those two things are waiting to come together if they haven't already. And don't listen to the cacophony of shoulds, right? We should be doing this, we should be doing that, etc., etc. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a minute to just pause and take a breath. And we're going to break into breakout groups. And I'll put these questions in the chat because your chat should follow you into your breakout groups. If not, maybe we'll send them to your groups. But here's what I would love for you to do. I would love for you to, in your groups, introduce yourselves, say where you're from, what ministry you're kind of representing, whatever it is. And we're going to have about 15 minutes for these groups. And then what are the 3 words you would use to describe your church, your ministry, that sort of thing? But here's the caveat to that. I don't want you to in any way use numbers or building descriptions, right? So things like, well, we're a Gothic church, right? We're a church that runs an ASA of. None of those things. Some 3 descriptive words. They can be feeling words or action words or those sorts of things. But what are 3 specific words to describe your church, your ministry, your diocese, whatever your ministry context is? And then what does your church ministry community do really well? So those are the things that I would like each person to go around the circle and share with the other people. And have fun in these groups. This is not super serious. These are judgment-free zones. We're not recording the small group discussions. So, it's okay if what you do really well is coffee, or that's what you did really well before the pandemic. And I'll give you that caveat. You're allowed to say what you did really well before the pandemic. Or you can say what you're doing really well now. Either one is totally fine because they're both part of your story. So Gar is going to send everyone into breakout groups. I'm going to put these questions in the chat, and we're going to have some sharing time. Okay. And then 15 minutes, and we'll give you like a minute warning when it's time to come back to the big group.
Jerusalem, you may get thrust into a room. You can just pull yourself back out.
Okay. Yeah, I'll need to take a.
Give me just a second. I want to check one thing, and then
Okay.
So we just had somebody just now join. I'll make sure she got in there. Hi, Sarah. Welcome. Okay, I'm going to open the rooms, and then it will take you there. You might have to say yes, you want to go, and then when it's time to come back, it'll thrust you automatically. You'll get a 60-second warning. So go ahead and join your room.
I love this part when everybody like starts coming back in.
This is what being zapped up on Star Trek and doing a training would be like.
Yeah. Oh.
Kelly has changed.
Yeah. Sarah, glad to have you on board. Welcome from Atlanta. You can say hi if you want. Everybody would like to hear from you.
Hey y'all, it's cold here. I feel like I'm back in Kansas.
Love it.
And I miss you guys.
Okay, I think we're all back, Jerusalem.
Okay. All right. Well, I had to switch my internet connection while y'all were all having fun talking, so we're gonna hope this works. Fingers crossed, lots of prayers. How were your breakout groups? Thumbs up, thumbs sideways, thumbs down? I mean, you're not gonna tell me thumbs down, right? They're all good? Okay. Good. Glad to see it. Was it hard or easy to come up with your 3 words, or you can make hand motions, you can put little things on the screen. Hard. Oh yeah, you can put it in the chat too. I forget we have the chat. Easy, some said hard. It's challenging sometimes to have to either boil it down or, yeah, it's good. Challenge. Good. Challenge is good. It gets our brains going. It's helpful to think through these things. One of the things we'll talk about next week. So this week is more of the why, kind of, or the big picture idea, or the inspiration, maybe reflective. Oh, that's good, Evan. Next week we'll get more into the weeds of the how, like how we actually do this, right? So but one of the things that we'll talk about next week, and I'll go ahead and say this week, because you're going to have Gar is going to send you an email that's got some optional homework assignments if you want, between our time together. And one of them is to ask a friend, maybe somebody that was in your small group with you, you could switch, but to do either a Facebook or a website scavenger hunt for you to see if they can find all the things. Because you know where they are on your website or your Facebook, but can somebody that's not familiar with your digital footprint find all the things? And so that's one thing. And one thing we're going to talk about next week is right now, we're mostly not in our buildings, or we're not in our buildings often. And how many of us, though, the first picture on our website or our Facebook is our building, right? We have beautiful buildings, but how much of our web presence is our buildings that we're not even in? So a challenge I like to offer everybody, especially for your Facebook, because I know it's way more complicated to change the website, but to think about at least your cover picture, that top big one, to be something with people in it, because the people are the church. And if anything has taught us that, it has been COVID. So can we have a picture that represents either those 3 things that you named, or the people in your church, but not your buildings? Because even though our buildings are precious to us, the people who use them, they're not precious to anyone else, right? So someone, when they're coming to figure out if they want to be a part of your community, there is a certain amount of the population that is interested in your architecture. Yes, that exists. But mostly they're looking to see, will I be welcomed? Will I feel like I belong? And the way we do that is with other people. So I just throw that out there as a challenge. Okay, so let's continue on. Oh, Gar, can you make me co-host again? Because I had to rejoin because of the internet issues. So I can share my screen again. So now we're going to go a little bit deeper into this Jeremiah passage. Thank you. And what we are talking about exactly here. And from current slide. Okay. So once you know who you are, you can begin to prepare a place of welcoming and belonging. So part of your homework for this week that will be on these sheets are just some things to encourage you, including the scavenger hunt, to really begin to think about who you are as a community, as a ministry, and to think past your building, right? I chose this picture because this is kind of a table in the wilderness idea, and that is where we find ourselves. So if you were going to set a table outside your building to invite people to, if you were going to set up your ministry without your building ever again, even, what would it be about? What are those core things that you would take into the wilderness to set up your ministry? This is where you begin to build that house. Remember that first part of Jeremiah, right? So, oh, we are talking about this tonight. I got my weeks mixed up. Okay, so that's good. I was all prepared. So this is where you begin to build the house, right? So you can think of your website and your Facebook page as your building in the wilderness in a lot of ways. I know some of you on here have done Invite, Welcome, Connect, and there's a lot of stuff in Invite, Welcome, Connect that's wonderful, that's about things like your signage, right? Can a visitor find the bathroom? Do they know where Sunday school is? Do they know how to give? This is true even in the digital sphere. How is your signage? Is your website and your Facebook presence, your Twitter, your Instagram, whatever social media you have, is it welcoming, or is it full of insider language? Is it full of insider images? Again, our buildings are beautiful. Our altars are beautiful. They're particularly beautiful to the people who've had experience with them. They're not always, they don't have the same emotional pull and significance to people who've never encountered them before. So, our altars, especially lots of the things that are on our altars, can mean a lot to people in our parishes, because maybe great grandmother donated that, or maybe they grew up, at their mother's side ironing the fair linens, and so it's really meaningful to them, or just because that's where they take communion, right? But if someone is just kind of visiting digitally, and trying to figure out if they belong, if all they're ever seeing is pictures of the altar flowers and the buildings and the grounds, that's great, but that doesn't really tell them if they belong or not. So that's just something to think about. Imagery is huge. Another thing is it clear when your service or other events are? You would be surprised how not clear that can be. You might think it's clear. And again, this is where the scavenger hunt will be really, really helpful. You will think that it would be clear, but because there is not a uniform way of doing websites, right? Like an about page, because I visit a lot of diocesan websites and parish websites, mostly when I'm trying to find a link to something, or I know that this thing's going to be happening and I want to share it with so and so. Can I find it? And a lot of times I can't find it because it's been embedded into a newsletter that's like 3 clicks deep in a website that I don't even know where the newsletter is. So things like keeping calendar updated, you might think that that's nobody uses the calendar, but a visitor actually would be looking for the calendar because they don't always know what time evening prayer is on Facebook, right? Like your digital things should be on your calendars just as much as your physical things, if you have a calendar. If you're not going to populate your calendar with activities on your website, don't have the calendar app, right? Like you don't have to have the calendar plugin on there. So just thinking through how you are going to build your digital house is really important, because it really does open the door. That's that door that people are going to come through. And I love Episcopal churches so much, obviously. I mean, but I love so many of our buildings. But there's one thing about our buildings that's sometimes like those red doors, they're beautiful and people don't have any clue what goes on behind them, right? They're like, I don't know what's happening behind there. And so I think our digital spaces can be very similar. They can be beautiful and significant to us, but are they inviting to others? That's a question we've got to ask. And then once you've built the building, right? You have the digital space, and we're going to get into the weeds about a lot of this next week, like particulars. But then, and you've assessed this soil that we talked about earlier. What is the soil that you have now? And that can mean a lot of different things. So, for instance, one of the things is maybe right now what you have the soil of is a lot of older people who have learned how to use Zoom and they're so excited about it. Maybe you thought the soil that you wanted was the soil of young families, but I'll tell you something, you've probably figured this out if you have a young families ministry in your church at all. They're cooked, like they're done. They're exhausted. They cannot read one more email. If there is a family with school-age children, especially anything under junior high, they can't read one more email from anybody. They are barely hanging on to the emails and the links and the chats that they have to do for work and then their kids' school, right? Like they're done. What they need from people right now is just to know that they are loved and that they will be welcome back when they can come up from air again. And mail, believe it or not, mail is a great new soil of 2020. Mail is really great for people because it's not in their inbox and they can hold it in their hands and they can read it on the couch. It doesn't, it's not a screen. So we are finding even at the church-wide level that old-fashioned mail is a great way to communicate, especially with families with children at home. Porch drops, dropping things off on porches, those sorts of things. But for a lot of family ministries right now, things like Zoom are not working. But yet with our older populations, they're working great because it's removed barriers like having to drive at night, right? Like how many Bible studies used to be at night and so many of our parishioners couldn't attend because they weren't comfortable driving at night, and rightly so. Well, now they don't have to worry about that. Some of you may even have experience with that. And so this new soil can be really exciting if we're willing to dig into it. But once you figure out what the new soil is, you also need something to share, right? If we're going to thrive and we've built a house and we want to set a table, we need to have things to share. You don't want to build this house and set a table and then have no nourishment to share with folks. So it's important that we begin to think about what are some of the things that we can share. And that's another reason why I asked you to think about what is something your church does really well. What are the 3 things that would describe your church? Because think about those things, and are you sharing those things? Have you figured out a digital way to share those things? It doesn't always have to just be Eucharist or morning prayer. Those are in our evening prayer. We are not limited to just those offerings. And it may be that you're offering one of the daily prayers and you're just not getting a lot of response. Well, there could be lots of reasons for that. But if one of the words that, for instance, one of the ways you described your church had something to do with, we really like to have fun together. Are you offering any digital fun? Are you playing trivia together or bingo together? There's lots of digital ways to have fun. One of my favorite examples that has come up during the pandemic that I heard about is in the Diocese, the Episcopal Church in Connecticut, the Diocese of Connecticut. And it was just this thing that happened. Like it wasn't even planned. Well, the Holy Spirit, right, was at work. So there was a congregation and they really always enjoyed cooking and eating, right? That was like a big part of their life pre-pandemic, their church life. Dinner for 8, 4 years groups, those sorts of things. well, once this happened, they couldn't do that anymore. And they were a small enough church, I guess, and fairly lay led, which was very positive in a lot of ways. And so they came up with this idea to have a cooking show for their coffee hour. So what that meant is that every Sunday they'd have, the Eucharist. They'd watch the Eucharist on their Zoom or their Facebook Live. And then afterwards, everyone would set up their tablets or their laptops or their phones or whatever in their kitchens. And one person from the congregation who had participated, I'm sure not everybody participated, but a good amount of people did. They would log into Zoom, and one person that week would be the cooking show host. And they would have had a recipe that they would have sent out ahead of time to everybody with like an ingredients list. And then everybody there on Zoom made these meals together. And it would just be like one dish, right? Like a casserole or something. Well, a lot of the people that were doing the cooking show only were households of one or two, but they were making like these big portions of food because that's how so many recipes are. So they were making these big portions of food. So they were freezing them. Well, their freezers were starting to get um, their freezers were starting to get full, and they didn't know what to do with all this food. So one of the missioners for the area at the same time had just heard about what they were doing and thought it was so cool and how neat. They were finding community, they were cooking. Well, then he got to talking to a social worker that he knew in the same area who said, well, I was telling him about this great need that they had in the community for freezer meals because there were these people who were now working like odd hours and were struggling to have food and couldn't prepare food for themselves a lot. Like there were some older people, and for different reasons, they needed freezer meals. And so the missioner was able to connect this church, was doing a cooking show for fun, with the social worker to provide these freezer meals. And this ministry has now grown to there's like 15 churches in Connecticut that are doing some version of this cooking show freezer meal ministry. So that church took the soil of 2020, right? And they took their great present joy, which was cooking, and they dug in and they built community, and it flourished and became this ministry and was able to answer this need. That's something they can share. And it's not serious, doesn't have to be serious. It's not, they didn't have to get, like a theological education to do it, that sort of thing. And it went to their root joy of who they were as a congregation, who they were as a ministry. So as you begin to think about how you can welcome and offer belonging to people, we know that people love to be with other people who are excited and comfortable and who are having a good time. Everybody wants to be with somebody having a good time, right? So what does your community do to have a good time? Maybe they really are very intellectual and they love to read. Maybe they love to laugh. I know churches are doing talent shows on Zoom and all, game night, all sorts of different things. But begin to think of the things that you can offer beyond just Eucharist or morning prayer. And they don't have to be super complicated, but if they can share some great joy, or even just present joy, it doesn't have to be like the great joy of your life, but just some joy and happiness. Recently at our last in-house, which is where all the Episcopal Church staff comes together for our staff meeting. Well, usually these are in person, and they're usually in person for about 3 or 4 days. And obviously we haven't been able to do this year. So the first one we had was back right after shutdown, maybe April. It must have been after Easter though. And it was kind of business as usual. It was a lot of meetings and we were all on Zoom together, and it wasn't bad, but it was kind of like, just more meetings, and we're all having meetings online. Okay. But our design team who works on those, listened to kind of all the feedback. And this last time when we had one, there were big chunks that were set aside for play and community. There was one day where you could choose to do things like bake cookies together or do a book discussion together or learn calligraphy together, all sorts of different things. And I did the bake cookie one. It was so much fun to bake cookies with my colleagues all over the country. from our various kitchens and to get to see each other's kitchens. And that was so fun. And then there was another time where we did a staff-wide trivia game, and we just got randomly put into breakout groups when we played Episcopal trivia. And I was very lucky because I got to be in the presiding bishop's team. So we won, of course. And because his mind is just like a sieve, he remembers everything. So, and we also had really in-depth conversations during that time. We also, had wonderful training sessions as part of our time together as well. But to have those moments of belonging, because that's what it felt like. It felt like belonging, was hugely important for our staff and for the work that we do, and to feel committed and to feel invested, and to remember that we're in it all together. So I just offer those up as a few examples of what it can look like to plant and nurture and garden a garden of what will grow in the current soil. So don't wait to set that table, right? Don't wait until someday, right? This is this last part of this passage that I love so much. It says, this is God's word on the subject, right? As soon as Babylon's 70 years are up, and not a day before, I'll show up and I'll take care of you, and I'll bring you back home. I know what I'm doing. I have it all planned out, and this is where that famous kind of verse, I have plans. I'm not going to abandon you. I've got the future. It's going to be okay. And I love that. And I love this part where it says, when you call on me, when you come and pray to me, I'll listen. When you come looking for me, you'll find me. Yes, when you get serious about finding me and you want it more than anything else, I'll make sure you won't be disappointed. I love this part because I think right now the temptation is so great to wait to set our tables. We have to wait maybe to set our physical Eucharistic tables in a lot of ways. But we also kind of have this holding our breath to wait to set tables of welcoming and belonging until we're back in our buildings or things are back to normal, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, right? And God is saying, no, you get on with life. You do all these things I told you to do. You build those houses, you plant those gardens, you live where you are and you flourish there, and get serious about talking to me, right? Because when you get serious about it, you'll find me. It's not that God isn't present, but sometimes we aren't serious about really looking for where God is, and to really setting that table of expectation that God is going to show up in our midst, no matter what season we're in. So don't wait to set the tables of welcome and belonging until things look like X, Y, and Z. Let's set tables now. Let's go ahead and begin to have the mentality that we're going to build these houses and plant these gardens right where we are. And we're going to plant what grows in this soil that we have. And we're going to set the table in the wilderness if we have to begin to invite people in, because people are lonely and hungry and thirsty and longing for community and transformation and liberation. We have to ask ourselves, are we serious about finding God where we are in this moment? And are we serious about inviting others to the table we have? Not the table we wish we had, but the table that we have, right? I mean, I think that's the thing. I love that the bishop started with Zacchaeus, because Jesus didn't say, Zacchaeus, I'm coming to your house when you're ready and it's set and you've cleaned and you've picked up all the dirty underwear and you get out the fine china and, right? No, Jesus said, I'm coming to your house. Like, I'm coming over right now. We're going, whatever state your house is in, we're going to it. And that's where we are. That is the moment. Jesus is ready to come to our houses, right? And sit at the table and invite everyone over. But are we willing to do that, even as maybe unfinished and messy and wildernessy as it is? Right now, it's great because you don't need to have the perfect technological setup. Okay, you don't need the best camera. You don't need the best microphones. You don't need like 5 video angles. You just need to show up and set the table of belonging. And it can be imperfect and it can be messy. But God, when we get serious about finding God, God will meet us there. Invitation matters. This is kind of the last part, and then we're going to go into one more group chat for the last few minutes of our time. So invitation really does matter. This is a story about invitation that I just want to share with you really quickly, because this is what you're going to talk about, hopefully, in your groups. So the picture of the young people on the one side, on the left. So I'm in the middle, I'm the bride, and this is me with my best friends from college. And the girl that's on the end in the gingham dress, if you can see her, her name is Joanne, and she's the one in the glasses in the second picture. And Joanne, I was a freshman in college, and I had come to Arkansas to go to college, and my family was living in Alaska at the time. And my mom had brought me down to Arkansas to go to college, and she took me in, and we went to the dorm, and we went to the store like 5 times to keep finding things we needed, and kind of put off the inevitable of her leaving, because I didn't know anybody. I was coming to a school where I knew no one. And so so we're sitting there in my dorm room, and all of a sudden my dorm room, just like the door just flies open, and there's this girl there, and she's real bubbly, and she goes, "Hi, my name's Joanne. Do you want to go to a mixer tonight?" And I was at a Southern Baptist college, so a mixer just meant we were going to play like youth group games like Chubby Bunny. So it wasn't that kind of mixer. And so I wanted to be polite in front of my mother and be the good girl I had been raised to be. And I said, "Well, yes, I would love to go." Inside thinking, you're a stranger. No, I don't want to go mix with strangers. But I said I would go. And I went. And most of these other girls that you see in this picture, they also went. And we became best friends after that night. And that was 20 some odd years ago. And they are still some of my closest friends to this day. In fact, they removed my aloneness that I felt. And they removed my aloneness that I felt being so far from home and being in a new place and not knowing what to expect out of the college life. And college retention is something that if you work on a college campus, you understand is huge, because college kids, if they don't find community right away, they have a much higher chance of dropping out, because community is so hugely important to making it through. The second picture is me with some of those girls at my father's funeral last year. They were able to drop everything and come be with me at his funeral. And so they have been my lifelong friends ever since. And my life is better and was changed because of that invitation. I truly believe that my life was changed because of Joanne's invitation to go play Chubby Bunny at a mixer. So what we're going to do now is you're going to go back to your breakout groups for one last time to share. And I would just, you have your choice. Again, we'll put these in the chat of what you would like to share, but either a story of a time that an invitation made a difference to you, or what is this Holy Spirit stirring within you this evening? What is the Holy Spirit inviting you to? So the topic is invitation, and just some sharing amongst the groups as you are able. So we're going to put those over in the chat. And if you are new to your group and you missed out last time, don't worry. You guys can just all introduce yourselves briefly as you share. Maybe not so much time there. So there you go. Oh, and yes, there's been some great comments too. So make sure you read the comment thread. Okay. And we'll take 10 minutes this time. So I know it'll be a quicker round, but we'll take 10 minutes.
And we will come back and do a little bit more housekeeping, and we might have a little bit of other things. So don't disappear. So, okay, here you guys go. I'm going to send you off. You have to accept the room. So. Okay, I think we're all back. It looks like we lost a couple of people, maybe. We're down to 55, so a couple of people might have had to back. So
Yeah.
Jerusalem, I think this is everybody looks like they're back. That's going to be back.
Okay, great. Well, welcome back. I hope y'all had good sharing time again. I know we're hitting up on 8:30 here, but I just wanted to. I think Gar's going to have a few housekeeping things, but for those of you who do want to stay around and ask some questions, feel free. So feel free to ask some questions, put them in the chat, or we can maybe use the raise hand function. I'm having a little bit of internet issues. So Gar, if you can see questions to
Yeah.
to feed them to me, that would be great because I can't see a whole lot right now.
Okay. So
I can see the chat, but I can't see if someone's raising their hand. Yeah.
I'll kind of try to watch.
Okay, great.
The first question that we have is in chat. It says, Jerusalem, can you speak to the value of how digital offerings can be accessed at any time rather than a set time?
Yes, absolutely. So one of the great things about digital is that you can record everything and then put them up for people to access again, whenever it's convenient with them. So for instance, this past weekend, the Diocese of Central Gulf Coast had an online revival that they live streamed on Facebook across several channels because we were doing it with them. So they live streamed it across the Episcopal Church channel, the Evangelism channel page, and their page. And so for the premiere of the event, there was probably about 700 people that engaged at some point. We kind of had about a steady 350 people. Like that number was kind of the one that kind of stayed, knowing that people were coming and going. So over the course of that 2 hours, we had about 700 people. Well, since then, just they're up to like 16,000 views, right? Like since then. So there's a huge benefit to keeping digital things online and to creating some content that can be used at any time. So things like Advent reflections, Epiphany reflections that can be used by people whenever it's convenient for them. Because again, right now, especially with so many people working from home and doing school for their kids from home and things like that, we don't all have the accessibility even to online content live necessarily that at the same time. So it is really, really helpful and can be a great thing to push out. The other thing I'd just like to tell everybody is don't be afraid to repost things that you've already recorded digital, to repost it. Like repost your Sunday service on Wednesday and say, if you missed that church this past Sunday, don't forget you can watch here, here's the link to it on YouTube or on our website or wherever, because people really will continue to engage as long as you remind them. And in terms of how you communicate things, a good rule of thumb is once you're annoyed with saying this resource is available, this resource is available, like once you've hit your threshold as the person who's putting that message out, that's actually when the audience is finally beginning to realize that you have put something out. And so we think, oh, we've told them once, we've told them twice, we've told them 3 times. Not really. Like it takes a lot. So, and then, yes, and creating short content. Thank you, Tom, for that. Is great. Everything does not have to be an hour-long production. 5 minutes is amazing. 3 minutes is amazing. Just again, reading. Here's your scripture for today. Can be super helpful. It's just super helpful entry points, and people love that stuff. Kelly had a question from their group about the logistics of algorithms and how a small church does not have resources can get around them or use them. That is not a question for me, but Jeremy Tackett, who is on our staff, that's a question for him. And if you want to help Gar maybe help facilitate that group reaching out to him, or maybe there's somebody in your group that can talk about algorithms. There are ways
I can answer that a little bit.
Or you can answer.
One thing you can do is have your people like your pages if you're on Facebook, if you're talking about that. Or if you're on YouTube, get people to like your videos. That will bump you up everywhere. So every time somebody likes something, their friends see that they've liked it. So that's one way you can do it. If you're talking about website stuff, part of it is just getting a website up and keeping it consistent. And, you know, again, having some of your people go and search it, all those kinds of things. There's little things like that you can do. I know one thing you can do also is you can ask, like, if you have a YouTube channel, you could ask the diocese people to like it. So if you're on Facebook, you can go to the diocesan page or go to the clergy page and say, here's our YouTube, and we can all like each other's stuff. And that helps. You know, we can all be a team here and like each other's stuff, and that can all sort of help with that. Those are some easy things to do. Okay, we got another question. Let's see, no. Oh, I missed it. I guess no, there's not a question. There's just comments.
There's lots of good comments about TikTok and liking and sharing. And don't be afraid to ask. Next week, we'll talk a little bit about this, about how to ask your people to ask and to invite digitally. But your people are your best evangelists when it comes to this sort of thing. Just sharing your post. share. Ask everyone to commit to share at least one post from your church Facebook this week, right? Those sorts of things. So it really does help. And so, yeah.
Or if you're doing online worship, your people can start watch parties, and that's just all it does is takes your feed and puts it on theirs, and that's a good way for people to share and evangelize. It's an easy thing to do. So.
Yeah, we'll get into digital hosting, what being a digital host is like, and what that ministry can actually be, and that sort of thing.
One person said, how can we share with those who do not have internet or have limited data?
That is a good question. Our church has brought back the old-fashioned mail hard copy newsletter. They had stopped doing that, and we have brought it back. And this Gen Xer is reading it excitedly every time it arrives. So some old-fashioned things might actually work, like sending newsletters, doing some drop-offs of the print out of the sermon, or those sorts of things, porch drops. Some churches have even figured out how to do a call-in. I am not skilled at that one, but I know some churches, and if that really interests you, email me and I will find the people that are doing this. But they have done where the people can actually call in and listen to the service on a phone. And Zoom offers a phone number, but like you said, there's a limited data issue. But if somebody has a landline, there's some ways you can do some call-in things.
Yeah.
It is possible to call in by cell phone, but because all the smartphones are so bloomin' smart, it's really hard to convince it not to try to switch to data. And so it drives me crazy. And now that the meeting ID numbers are so long and it doesn't allow copy and paste, that I can tell my memory's not long enough to remember that whole number. And so when I'm trying to help somebody join that, you know, I'm kind of with the blind leading the blind.
One thing.
That's a good point. It's not perfect.
One thing you can do is if you have a couple people in your church, we did this at St. Thomas, if you have a couple people in your church that are proficient with Zoom, ask them to be your help desk and fan it out a little bit, and have people who can call folks and help them through that, because that can be a real help. We did that for the first couple of months.
Our guru is a high school teacher who's pretty overwhelmed.
Okay, so some of you might drop off, that's fine. I've got a couple more questions. Let's see. Someone says, I've been getting so many postcards urging me to vote. Could we run some really evangelistic outreach via postcards?
Yes, in fact, the Episcopal Church has some postcards that you can print and send. We've got some Way of Love ones. We've got some evangelism ones. Again, mail mail is a big thing.
Yep.
And then, yeah,
Tom Shrimp has a question.
and just experiment. Just experiment. It's going to be, we don't have to take everything so seriously as if we do it this one time. This means we're doing it this way forever, or it's okay to fail. Like, we need to all embrace the fact that it's okay to fail. We're not going to win pandemic ministry. Like, this is not like Survivor. We're not trying to win at pandemic ministry. And so we can have fun with it, and we can say to our people, hey, this is an experiment. We're going to try it. We're going to try it a couple of times, and it might not work, but we're going to learn something from it. And that's okay. So just to have that spirit of innovation and experimentation and the freedom to fail as part of the process, I think is a huge way to kind of change the narrative about this time.
So I'm going to do, before too many more of you drop off, let me do a couple of quick housekeeping items. And then I'll call on a couple people who've raised their hand. One is we'll use the exact same link that we did for this. So I'll send it out again next Tuesday, probably in the morning, just to remind you. I may send it Monday, but the same Zoom link will work for the meeting next week. If additional people want to join, that's fine. Just let me know. I have a limit of 100, and we're not that close to it. And we do have some people who could not come tonight that are coming next week. They let me know that. And so we'll do some stuff like that. In terms of the video, I will get this rendered tomorrow, and then I will try to get it posted on the Diocesan YouTube channel. I'll reach out to some staff there that can help me with that. If not, I'll put it on the St. Thomas channel and send you guys a link. And then we can get that link out. It can be watched by anybody at any time. So, I mean, once we get it up, we'll get that going for you, because it might be helpful if you have leaders in your church, just let them see it. And so just watch for that. A couple of you are asking if we can do some collecting of stuff. This is an evangelism committee event. So my co-chair is on here, John Hollinger. So we'll be forming some stuff around that from this conference. So we'll try to get some best practices. And also I'll call this group back together in a couple of weeks after Jerusalem goes, and we'll do some follow-up. That's really important. We'll do some follow-up and say, what have you tried? What are you finding out? And we'll get some follow-up stuff so that we can continue to do some work together. Okay, so that's all I have. So if you need to go, you're welcome to bug off the meeting. If you have more questions, we'll spend some time. We'll spend a little bit more time with Jerusalem. And we'll see you guys next week if you do leave. And then Tom Shrimp, you had your hand raised. So if you want to come on.
Just an idea that our church did. Our vestry created a branches and vines group, and it's a calling tree that each of the vestry members calls a list of people every week to stay in touch. And particularly it's good at reaching out to those that aren't connected by internet or that sort of thing. So just one idea that we've implemented.
Great.
And then Claudia, you had a question?
Yes. We are doing adult Sunday school on Zoom, and I've heard of churches doing drop-off packets or whatever for children's and youth Sunday school. But is anybody doing a Zoom Sunday school for littler people?
They are, but I would check with your families to make sure they have the capacity to show up for it. There are people doing that, but it's really been the parents have to be bought in, because the kids are over screen timed, right? I mean, everybody's just kind of crammed in. But yeah, it can be done. And there's a great group called Forma on Facebook and forma.church that has lots of resources. And buildfaith.org is another website, buildfaith.org, that has tons of resources on how to do this, how to do Zoom Sunday school, how to do drop-off kits, all of that sort of stuff. So okay. I would look in, there'll be great resources for you.
What was it? I got Forma, and then the second one was Forma something else.
It was forma.church.
Oh, dot church.
It's a
Okay.
website. Yeah. Yeah. And then Build Faith, right? Thank you, Andrew, for putting that in the chat.
Okay.
And then
Thank you.
Chris Whalen had a question.
Yeah, so actually, this is for you, Jerusalem. So we are both blessed and have the challenge of a parishioner a long time ago set up a bunch of different digital profiles for us. And I have been attempting to, we'll just call it break into our Instagram account for a while now, and frankly can't figure out how to do it. So I was wondering, does the National Church actually have like a Facebook rep that they work with or something like that where we could like we've been jumping through hoops for months trying to be able to unlock like getting password access into our Facebook account, Instagram. I can't even figure out how you request access on that, and been trying for several months. And so I didn't know if the National Church had a relationship with those folks that we could help escalate through, or I know it's super specific. I just am, Father John can tell you I'm at wit's end trying to break into our stuff.
So do you how many followers do you have on Instagram?
We don't have a ton. And so my follow-up question would be is sometimes I'm just wanting to like, let's just burn it down.
Yep. Just burn it down and start over.
Perfect. Love that answer. Thank you.
You're welcome. Yep. You don't have a huge following attached to some of those profiles because you're not alone. This happens quite frequently, unfortunately. And so just start over. Just, yeah.
Okey-doke.
There
Thank
you go.
you.
You're welcome.
I think one of the things that's interesting, like what Jerusalem was saying, is we're in that experiment time. And I know we've tried 10 different things for worship and all kinds of different stuff. And some of it's worked, some of it hasn't. And then we're trying to take notes on what's next and figure out what we're going to do. So Claudia, you had a question. I see your hand.
This is more of a comment. I have been touting and sharing with people to get on Forward Movement for their daily podcasts, all kinds of stuff you can get on Forward Movement if your own church doesn't want to set those kinds of things up. And Advent Word, there's just some cool stuff on there.
Thank you. That's all good stuff.
So
Yeah, there's the other thing to say, and I'll say this next week too, is you don't have to create everything. Like the resources exist, and we'll talk about hosting watch parties next week, but you can also host watch parties with other people's content. So your church can show Forward Movement's videos or whomever's, the Episcopal Church videos from your page. So you don't have to create all the content yourself. You can send out a lot of this stuff that's already been created and that we want you to share that way. Like we want you to share our videos from your pages. So because it gets it out there. We don't create it to hold on to it. We create it to share.